Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for October 28th through November 3rd. This week I read 2 books, I watched 2 shows, I watched 1 movie, and I listened to 2 books. Also, if you saw either of my last 2 videos, I'm still pretty sick, so that's a thing. Before this weekend, I'd never really considered putting makeup on the inside of my nose, but here we are. First book I finished this week was Toil and Trouble. This is an anthology of 16 different stories to do with witchcraft and women throughout the ages. I meant to complete this for Spooktober, but I didn't quite finish it by the end of the week, so I just finished it after the week ended. And the thing with me about reading anthologies during a readathon is I don't really absorb every single story. I can remember little bits and pieces, but I can't remember the whole story or all 16 stories for that matter. What I can tell you is there are some fabulous authors in this anthology, and I really enjoyed the reading experience, even if I don't really have any memories I can draw from or lasting impressions because I sped through them so quickly. The book that I spent Halloween finishing was Odd One Out by Nick Stone. This one is about 3 friends who are all a little bit in love with each other. The book is divided up into thirds, so the first section is one friend, then the second friend, then the third friend, and instead of going back to scenes we've already been through and reimagining them through the other person's lens, we are just going through one timeline. Not only is this full of a lot of sexual and emotional tension, there's also a subplot that is a mystery. This book talks a lot about growing up, sexual identities, labels, that type of thing, and I tore right through it. I absolutely loved this reading experience. It was one of the best books I read last month. If you want to know about all of the books I read last month, I will leave the link to my October wrap-up down below. On to the shows I watched this week. I finished watching the 11th season of Survivor and then watched the current episode from the 37th season of Survivor. Actually, I did those 2 things in reverse. I usually watch that episode Thursday morning and then go to my friend's house on Thursday afternoon-ish and watch Survivor. Regardless, I was kind of meh about who won the 11th season, but now I know. As for season 37, I absolutely adore the relationship that is forming between John and Christian. It is just so cute, and I want them to be friends for the rest of their lives. On Saturday, I pretty much didn't want to get out of bed all day, so I didn't, and I watched the first 14 episodes of the 14th season of Grey's Anatomy. Way back when I started doing entertainment wrap-ups is when I first started watching Grey's Anatomy, and I watched the first 12 seasons in about 3 months. And then I basically have to wait for a season to end, and then wait another 6 months before it comes to Canadian Netflix. Although, of course, there was a huge cliffhanger ending of the 13th season, because that's how seasons on Grey's work, it wasn't the worst cliffhanger ending, but I was really interested to see how it was resolved in the 14th season. There was also a subplot with a character played by Matthew Morrison, which was resolved in this season as well, thank goodness. And because he's known for playing like Mr. Shu on Glee, I kind of adore when he does creepy dudes, because it makes it even creepier. The movie I watched this week was Hocus Pocus. I watched this for the first time in probably at least a decade, if not a decade and a half, and it was real fun to revisit. If you haven't seen this Halloween classic, it's about these 3 witches, the Sanderson sisters, who were killed 300 years ago, and now their house is basically a macabre museum. Max is a new kid who has just moved to Salem and thinks it's all a bunch of hocus pocus, and accidentally does the things that you have to do to bring them back to life. What struck me the most on rewatch is how fake everything looks. Like everything is very clearly sets. But I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean it in they had a very particular style and you can tell. Also, this kid had the most amazing bedroom ever, and I want a tower in my bedroom. I judge pretty much all architecture based on whether or not I'd like to read there, and I would like to read there. On to the audiobooks I read this week. I finished I Know You Know by Gilly McMillan. This one is about a man whose childhood best friends were murdered about 20 years ago, and the person that was convicted of that murder has recently killed themselves in prison. There's been some speculation as to whether or not the person convicted actually killed his best friend, so he's gone back to his small UK town to create a podcast about it. This book had 3 main points of view, and from that we got 3 audiobook narrators, one of whom did Strange the Dreamer, so it was nice to hear his voice again. I want to preface this by saying that I actually really enjoyed this book and enjoyed the mystery and the twist that happened near the end. That being said, there were little things about the podcast element that really bothered me. For one, the person who's doing the podcast is a filmmaker, so he knows about audio and he knows that crisp audio is definitely needed in podcasts. However, he scheduled all of his interviews with people in busy coffee shops or parks, or with dogs barking in the background, or those types of things. And I could have forgiven that if the podcast elements in the audiobook were done full audio, but they weren't. It was just him reading a transcription of what would have appeared in the podcast. cast. Again, I really enjoyed the interweaving stories, but those were just little things that I have to nitpick about because they bother me. The other audiobook I read this week was An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This one is kind of like The Night Circus in that there are magical families dueling, but there are actual several magical houses in this turning. What I really enjoyed about this story were the nods to other magical stories, such as one of the characters is Miranda Prospero. If you've read your Shakespeare, you know where that came from. There's also House Merlin, which is probably the easiest reference to pick up on, and I'm sure there were other references that I didn't pick up on because I don't know the source material. Essentially, this is a tournament that happens every 10 to 20 years to figure out who is going to lead the unseen world. I found all of the descriptions of the magic very beautiful. There were also discussions of ethics, race, and class, and I just really enjoyed this book. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!